One of the basic functionalities of the JavaScript API is the ability to switch between views. As you can see here, I've created some buttons that allow me to switch between the different views. You can do this in a variety of programmatic ways if you choose to. And this is really nice when combined with the functionality from our first video, which is to hide that list of tabs that normally resides at the top of your visualization. Now, the first video, the introduction and embedding video, should be considered a prerequisite to this video. And if you have completed that, you can go ahead and continue to use your .html, whatever it was called from the previous video, and your JavaScript file from the previous video. Just make sure that your JavaScript file is called tutorial.js. Alternatively, you can download the zip file from this web page, which will get you up to date to the point that you need to be at. It'll include this variety of files here, and the nice thing about this zip file is that it will also include lesson2end.js and .html, so you can reference those if you get lost during this tutorial as you're following along. If you are going to go the route of downloading this zip file, you need to just do one thing, and that's rename this lesson2start to tutorial.js. Make sure that you're renaming the JS file. You can rename the lesson2start.html if you'd like, but it's not necessary. Let's edit our lesson2start.html, or the file that you have left over from the previous video. Notice inside of these comments where we say all of our work will happen here, we have the very beginnings of a menu. What I've done is inside of these commented lines here is gotten you started with our first function that we'll be creating. So let's go ahead and uncomment those two lines, the one that have switching views and line chart in them. That first line will create just a menu header, which will divide out our different lessons for us. And that second line is the actual button that we'll be creating, which will allow us to switch to our line chart. Now notice here we're saying that on click, we would like to switch views line chart. So we're calling a function called switch view, and we're passing it a string line chart. What we need to do is we actually need to go into our JS file and create that switch view function. So I'm going to save this HTML file, and I'm going to come to my tutorial.js and edit that with Notepad. Here we have the JS as we left it. Now we need to start creating our functions. Now there's no need to do this inside of the window.onload, but you could do that if you'd like. We just need to start creating that function. So we'll call it function switch view. What we want to do is we want to be able to tell it a sheet name and have it switch to that particular sheet. So we'll give it that argument called sheet name. And what we'll do is we'll say workbook equals viz.getWorkbook. Now let's take a moment to understand what's going on there. Remember that we called our Tableau viz object viz. So what we want to do is call viz.getWorkbook. This is a built-in function to the viz object, and that will give us a workbook object, which we can start to do certain things on. Now that we have our workbook, we want to switch sheets. And that happens with a function called activate sheet async, to which you need to pass in a string, which is pointing at the name of the worksheet that you would like to activate, that is to show and to make the active sheet. Well, The one thing to make sure you have here is when you do pass in that sheet name, it has to be the exact sheet name, it has to match exactly the correct spaces and the correct capitalization, etc. So we have that function. Now let's go back to our HTML, and we can see what it's doing here on that on click. It's going to call that function we just created, and it's going to send in as sheet name a string line chart. Let's run this HTML now. And we have that button we just created. If we click it, it switches to a line chart, just as we had wanted. Now let's make a couple buttons so that we can switch between all of the different tabs and not just switching to a line chart. We've already seen that we have a tree map visualization inside this workbook. We also have a dashboard, so we want to be able to choose between those three tabs in our workbook. So let's go back to our HTML file here. Creating a button, another button, is going to be very similar to that line chart button. So I'm just going to copy that line, and I'm actually going to paste it twice. The second button is going to be our tree map. Go back to that tree map. And the third button is going to bring us to our dashboard. Now the great thing about this switch view function that we created there in our JavaScript is that it accepts a sheet name to pass into activate sheet async. And because of that, we can reuse that switch view function as long as we each time tell it which sheet we want to switch to. In the case of the tree map button, we want to switch to a sheet called tree map. And in the case of the dashboard function, we want to switch to a sheet called my dashboard. We'll hit save and open it up in Chrome once again. And now we go back to that tree map, but now we have the ability to switch to the line chart, to the dashboard, and back to the tree map. So this switching views functionality is really crucial for embedding in portals and any kind of application you're probably going to do with the JavaScript API. It really allows you to remove that list of tabs that you typically have and seamlessly integrate your visualization with the rest of the web page. The next video is another basic functionality, very crucial, and that's the ability to filter. So I hope to see you there.